Welcome here at the Palais du Luxembourg for this public session of the COST program. The Costian knows what the COST program is. The French, don't know what we are talking about, but you will listen to it today. We are researching some communication, populist political communication. You will know about it in the second part of this morning. The program is, as you have seen, first a welcoming by Françoise Cartron, which is Vice President of the Senate and who allows us to be here today. So first of all, thank you. Then you will have a keynote speaker, Sylvain Crépon, which is one of the few experts of the Front National. He knows the party very well as a sociologist, so you will have a lot of inputs and something to think about this party. Then we will hear about populism in Europe and back again to France in the third session with some scholars from the American University, some journalists, some PR. So it will be a nice morning.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais tout d'abord vous souhaiter la bienvenue dans ce palais du Luxembourg, dans cette salle Gaston Monerville. Vous dire qu'en tant que vice-présidente du Sénat, je suis très heureuse de vous accueillir pour cette matinée de réflexion et m'excuser parce que les quelques mots que je vais prononcer, je les prononce en français, mon anglais étant, je vais dire, inintelligible, je pense, voilà. Donc, ravi de vous accueillir, ravi aussi de vous accueillir pour ce thème qu'on ne peut pas d'actualité, la stratégie populiste en Europe. Dans la période que nous vivons, mais bien évidemment, depuis quelques années, c'est un sujet qui est au cœur de notre réflexion, au cœur de la vie de notre démocratie. Et donc, lorsque j'ai été sollicitée, je suis ravie de pouvoir, et je pense que le Sénat est ravi de pouvoir soutenir une telle démarche. Je me présente, je suis sénatrice élue d'un département de la Gironde, donc avec la belle ville de Bordeaux, au cœur de ce département, que vous devez tous connaître, au moins pour ses vins. Je suis membre de la commission éducation, culture, sport, jeunesse. Donc, et j'étais, dans le passé, j'ai été enseignante et j'ai enseigné pendant 20 ans en ce qu'on appelle en ZEP, en zone d'éducation prioritaire. C'est dire qu'un certain nombre de problématiques, déjà il y a 20 ans, émergeaient et déjà il y a plus de 20 ans m'inquiétaient. Lundi, à l'occasion des 50 ans des sciences économiques et sociales, l'Association des professeurs de la discipline publiait un texte et ses membres rappelaient, je les cite, « À l'heure où en Europe et ailleurs, les mutations économiques et sociales majeures qui affectent des sociétés de plus en plus complexes alimentent toutes sortes de préjugés, une initiation au regard éloigné des sciences sociales est pourtant plus que jamais nécessaire. » Je partage tout à fait cette analyse et je crois que nous avons besoin de ces moments de pause, de mise à distance, de regard pour, et en particulier, je dirais nous, les politiques, pour comprendre ce qui se joue et pour être capable de construire des perspectives qui, quelque part, sont capables de redonner confiance ou de redonner espoir à nos concitoyens. Les apports, bien évidemment, des différentes disciplines universitaires afin d'éclairer les enjeux économiques et sociaux contemporains sont primordiaux. Bien entendu, cela passe par la formation intellectuelle et citoyenne des élèves, des jeunes, et cela se fait nécessairement en éclairant les sujets majeurs de notre temps, qu'il s'agisse du fonctionnement des organisations des institutions politiques, qu'il s'agisse d'un problème qui traverse notre société, les inégalités, qu'il s'agisse aussi de la construction européenne. Je pense que nous avons besoin, sans doute que pris dans une espèce de frénésie du temps et d'action, les politiques, nous avons besoin de pouvoir analyser, regarder et prendre du temps pour mieux proposer des choix qui pourraient aujourd'hui, c'est notre sujet, ça va l'être dans un mois, freiner cette progression inéluctable, qu'on a l'air de percevoir comme inéluctable, des thèmes du Front National et donc de tous les extrêmes. Nous sommes aussi, le calendrier le fait, demain, les dirigeants européens célébreront les 60 ans des textes fondateurs de l'Europe. Et en cette date symbolique, force est de constater que l'Union européenne n'est pas épargnée par toutes ces problématiques. Nous avons eu et nous avons toujours à faire face à la crise des réfugiés, face à laquelle nous avons des difficultés à trouver des réponses partagées par le plus grand nombre, les difficultés économiques persistantes, et on l'entend, on a eu à vivre la crise grecque qui n'est toujours pas terminée, et puis dernièrement le Brexit. Tout ceci, bien évidemment, alimente un sentiment de méfiance, voire de rejet par rapport à l'Europe. Alors aujourd'hui, les risques de dislocation sont sérieux. Il faut les prendre tels qu'ils se présentent, car, vous le dites dans votre colloque, vous allez analyser la stratégie européenne. Et c'est vrai que moi, je regarde avec inquiétude cette vingtaine d'États européens dans lesquels au moins un parti politique réclame un référendum pour une sortie de l'Union européenne, et tous ces pays dans lesquels toutes les thèses les plus extrémistes font leur lit et progressent en termes de voix et progressent souvent en termes de sièges. Les mouvements populistes ont le vent en poupe, le Front National bien sûr en France, le Parti de la Liberté, le PVV néerlandais, longtemps en tête dans les sondages pour les législatives. Nous avons le même phénomène en Allemagne. Donc, aujourd'hui, vous avez raison, il faut regarder comment se construit cette stratégie populiste qui s'appuie bien évidemment sur une défiance des citoyens. Et lorsqu'on voit un certain nombre de sondages, 73% des Italiens pensent que leur pays est en déclin, 70% en Espagne, et en France, 57%. Donc il y a cette défiance et cette perte de confiance par rapport à l'avenir du pays dans lequel les uns et les autres vivent, tous pensant qu'aujourd'hui, ils vivent moins bien que ne vivaient leurs parents. Et, on a coutume d'en parler, ils ne perçoivent plus pour leurs enfants cette perspective d'ascenseur social. Donc, tout ceci alimente bien évidemment les résultats électoraux que l'on constate. Tout ceci alimente notre inquiétude, celle que nous avons, nous tous ici en France, à un mois de ces élections présidentielles. Sans doute, j'en prends ma part, je pense que certaines stratégies ou comportements politiques ne font que alimenter cette défiance et donc ne permettent pas de faire émerger ce qui peut être un projet de société dans lequel les citoyens et les citoyennes puissent retrouver espoir, confiance et envie d'être ensemble, puisque c'est ça, et envie de construire ensemble. Voilà un peu, ce colloque intervient, je vous le disais, à une période un peu particulière. Donc, moi je pense, et je suis ravie, j'étais ravie de vous accueillir et je suis ravie d'entendre ce que vont être vos analyses, parce que, je vous le dis, comme dans beaucoup d'autres sujets, nous avons besoin, et moi tout particulièrement, de nous nourrir de vos regards croisés, de votre réflexion, des comparaisons, du regard par rapport à une vision européenne. Nous avons besoin de comprendre, parce que tant que nous n'aurons pas compris comment les choses, je dirais, se mettent en place, s'alimentent, prospèrent, nous ne pourrons pas proposer une offre politique qui soit crédible et qui permette d'enrayer cette montée que parfois on appelle inexorable, mais sur laquelle nous ne devons pas, face à laquelle nous ne devons pas nous résigner. Donc je vous souhaite une très bonne journée, et puis je pense que ça va continuer voilà, demain sous d'autres formes. Je vous souhaite une très bonne journée. Je salue tous les étudiantes et les étudiants qui sont là. Ravis que cette jeunesse soit aussi présente, parce qu'aussi, eh bien, écoutez, on espère, on a dû sans doute, nous, une certaine génération, peut-être rater des choses, passer à côté. Donc on compte sur vous, les jeunes, pour nous permettre de construire cette belle société fraternelle, tolérante, et où chacune et chacun ait sa place. Et donc, merci pour votre présence et très bonne journée.
Merci, thank you. Sylvain, we are listening to you.
Thank you very much. So my intervention is entitled The New Populist Speech of Marine Le Pen's Front National, a break from her father's FN. So I would like first to say thank you to Nicolas Hubé and Gaël Villeneuve for the organization of this conference about populism in Europe, and also to give me the honor to make the introduction, which is a bit a challenge for me, I have to admit, considering I haven't been practicing my English for quite a long time. So I'll ask the audience to forgive my hesitations during the intervention. So my intervention is focused on the renewal of the Front National populism, especially since Marine Le Pen became the president of the party in the year 2011. But before starting, I would like to say a word about how I've been working on this political party for nearly 20 years by now. Gosh. My researches are mostly focused on the militants and leaders of Front National. I try to understand in a comprehensive way how and why they joined and support the Front National. So I make many interviews of leaders, militants, sometimes just electors, some kinds of ethnography, going to the meetings, the march, follow the propaganda actions like sticking posters or live latings, which at a time, for example, in the 90s, it could be sometimes a bit risky. And of course, I studied the speeches of the main leaders and common militants. And one important thing must be said. When it is asked to me by the leaders and militants, I always mention that I don't share the opinion of Front National. So I try to work to make my investigation in total transparency, which this might be a bit strange, but most of the time it reassures the militants and the leaders. I share on that point the considerations of Daniel Bizel, who says that Front National must be studied as any other political party, and so that the sociologists shouldn't develop a special treatment, otherwise he or she could distort its specificity. I also agree with Alexandre Désé when he says that the Front National must be studied with the use of the classical concept and methodology in political science and sociology. So, let's talk now about the populism of Front National. The populism has always been a style, as Guillermet said, used by the extreme right leaders in France, from Boulanger, the General Boulanger, Pierre Poujade during the 50s, and of course Jean-Marie Le Pen since the 70s. All these leaders have always denounced, condemned the elites from politics, the media, the economy, supposed to be disconnected from common people's problems. So these charismatic leaders has always condemned the parliamentary institutions supposed to ignore the people's problems and pretended to establish a direct democracy. But their populism has always been associated with the nationalist ideology, and this is their specificity. For decades, populism in its nationalist form in France has associated the elite with the Jews in the economy, the media, and the politics. So the populism in its nationalist form in France denounced a pretended Jewish conspiracy. The Jewish conspiracy was supposed to control all the significant institutions, especially politics and economy. In most active purpose in France, its most active purpose in France was described by Édouard Drummond in its book La France Juive, the Jewish France, published in 1886, which became a bestseller, republished several times during the next decades. For example, between 1886 and 1914, there were more than 200 republications of that book. In his book, Drummond denounced the collusion between the Jews and the main financial banks, accusing, for example, the Rothschild Bank to have managed the financial crash in 1882. And so these books inspired the anti-Semitism during the Dreyfus affair. And then it influenced the nationalist ideologies that started to be developed right just at the end of the affaire Dreyfus, and especially Charles Maurras and its nationalisme intégral, integral nationalism. In its nationalist theory, Charles Maurras considered that it was a necessity to be related to the ancestors of the land and to be Catholic, to be considered as a real French. All the naturalized French were considered as artificial French. Maurras used the expression of paper's French, français de papier, to describe these people. And we have to know this expression is still used nowadays by some Front National leaders. According to Maurras, there were 4 confederate groups that conspired against French identity: the Jews, the Protestants, the Masons, freethinkers, and the migrants. So, for example, when Léon Blum became president of the council, like prime minister in 1936, it became a real trauma for Maurras, just because Blum was a Jew. So Maurras declared, for example, that Blum was a man to be shot dead, but in the back. It was for him the proof that the Jewish conspiracy finally succeeded. And such a man like Blum could never understand the real common French people because he was not related to its ancestors and its ancestral religion. So, of course, after World War II, because of the trauma of the Holocaust and the compromission of most of the French extreme right leaders with the regime of Vichy, then the nationalist ideology has no significant influence. It reborn a moment with the movement of Pierre Poujade during the 50s, especially when Poujade decided to fight the independence of Algeria. Poujade was typically a populist leader, but a leader who never attempted really to reach the power. His electors were mostly craftsmen and shopkeepers protesting against taxes. During his speeches, he couldn't stop condemning the politicians, supposed to be disconnected with the common people, especially when they were supposed to have foreign origins. He blamed, for example, the president of the council, Prime Minister, Pierre Mendès France, making many allusions of his Jewish origins, and especially because Pierre Mendès France changed his name. So Poujade could be described as a typical nationalist and populist leader, proud to be implanted in his land. And as we know, Jean-Marie Le Pen became one of his close member of staff, elected deputy at the age of 27 in 1956. But Poujade's movement finally disappeared because of his leader's provocations, the end of the war in Algeria, and also the election of de Gaulle at the presidency, a patriotic leader who drained some of his electors. After Poujade disappeared of French political life, the nationalist populism had no significant group in France. During the 60s, there were just few neo-fascist groups which couldn't be considered, moreover, as populist. So in 1972, the Front National was created by some members of a small neo-fascist group, Ordre Nouveau, New Order. Their goal was to create a real political party that could run for the elections and which could be an opportunity to spread their ideology into the public and also could give them the opportunity to be elected. And they proposed Jean-Marie Le Pen to become the president of the movement because of his experience as a nationalist leader and also for his reputation to be a moderate in the nationalist circle of influence. Le Pen finally took the total control on the Front National and started the race of his new political career. He spent about 10 years to reinforce his party, trying, for example, to assemble all the groups of the extreme right. Therefore, in the beginning of the 80s, the Front National became the only significant structure of the extreme right in France. So Le Pen could start to focus seriously on the elections. At the time, end of 70s, beginning of 80s, Le Pen claimed that his party was the only one to really represent the right wing in France. His ideology was strongly anti-communist, traditionalist, conservative, for example, with the opposition of the abortion, to the abortion, and of course, anti-migrants. His role models at the beginning of the 80s was Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. The first political success came in 1984 at the European elections. The Front National got more than 9% and sent a group of deputies at the European Assembly. This success took place in a context where the socialists had just won the presidential and parliamentary elections, and the right didn't finish to rebuild itself. So there was for Le Pen a real opportunity to pretend to represent the right in France. We have to say also that it was a context of Cold War, and in this context, the extreme right were anti-communist and support the alliance, the Atlantic Alliance with the United States. During the rise of his party in the 80s, Le Pen was claiming that he was one of the only uncorruptible politicians in a context where many corruption affairs were discovered and denounced by the medias. Some of his slogans during the 90s was tête haute, main propre, which could be translated like head held high, clean hands. Meanwhile, Le Pen was in the extreme right continuity, for example, condemning a pretended Jewish conspiracy, making references into many speeches to the stateless finance and explicit allusions into the extreme right language to the Jews. He was perpetuating this way Maurras nationalist ideology by associating the corrupting and corrupt elite to the Jews. During the invasion of Iraq in 2003, The official paper of the Front National at the time, National Hebdo, which disappeared few years after, published many articles explaining a collusion between United States and Israel by the number of Jews into George Bush administration. In a context where more and more working class people voted for the Front National, for example, at the presidential elections in 1995, there were 30% of working class people that voted for Jean-Marie Le Pen, which the Front National was the first political party in this social class. So in this context, Jean-Marie Le Pen started to claim that globalization was the cause of the unemployment in France and in Europe, making the promotion in the same time of social benefits policy. Some posters were claiming at the time social policy is Front National, or is defended by Front National. Le social, c'est le Front National. It is also during that period that the Front National conceptualized the slogan, neither right or left, just French, ni droite ni gauche français, which was coming from a fascist group during the 30s. So the real rise of Marine Le Pen became in the year 2006, when his father made her his campaign manager for the 2007 presidential elections. She started to introduce her own changes. She started to integrate a Republican position and took distance in the same time with her father's anti-Semitism. The real change occurred in the year 2011, when she succeeded to her father at the presidency of the Front National. She then condemned explicitly her father's position about the Holocaust, saying, for example, that the Holocaust was the acme of the inhumanity. She was then inspired by some neo-populist European movement, like the PVV of Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, or the UDC of Oscar Freisinger in Switzerland. These political parties had no roots with proper extreme right movement, but they expressed a new form of xenophobia which became very efficient to reach new electors. These movements have no anti-Semitic positions. Most of their xenophobia concern the Muslims, who are considered like a danger for the liberal aspect of the Western culture. For example, secularism, feminism, gay rights, and so on. This is how Marine Le Pen declared in 2010, when she was running for the presidency of Front National. I can hear that in some neighborhoods it is more and more a problem to be a woman, gay, French, or even white. So the Front National of Marine Le Pen pretend now to defend the French tradition of secularism, the laïcité, which is a bit strange considering that French nationalist group always fought the law of 1905 that established the laïcité, the French secularism law in France. So, is Marine Le Pen's Front National a real change? I would say that the answer is yes and no. Actually, the secularism became a very efficient way in France to fight Islam, but through a democratic language. For example, Hans-Georges Betz explained clearly that this new European populist movement expressed a new xenophobia built with arguments they borrowed to left-wing political parties. But if we study carefully the speeches of Marine Le Pen, we realize that they are still based on a nationalist logic. I'll just take two examples. First, the use of secularism. Marine Le Pen explained recently that according to her, Islam was able to adapt itself to French Republic values. But in some other interviews or speeches, she says that Islam can no longer be adapted to French Republic because this religion wouldn't accept secularism, the separation between religious and political fields. This principle of secularism could only raised, according to her, into Christian country. So she built a direct link between Christianism and secularism, which means that Islam couldn't be part of Western countries. It is, of course, historically false when we know that the Catholicism had been the main opponent to the secularism in France. The second example is the feminism. According to Marine Le Pen and many members of her staff I have interviewed, especially women, I have to say, the equality between men and women wouldn't be the result of the fight of feminist movement, but something like could be described like a natural evolution of Western Christian culture. The politic dimension of feminism that nationalist movement always fought is then ignored. So, thank you. So, according to Marine Le Pen, the elites nowadays defend the multiculturalism and so the conservative aspects of Muslim culture. And it is funny to see that, for example, the feminist and the feminist movement are described like hysterics, you know, like very old stereotypes of pronounced by the anti-feminist movements. So, in conclusion, we can consider that there is, of course, a real change in Front National of Marine Le Pen. When Marine Le Pen take distance with the anti-Semitism of her father, we cannot say that, okay, nothing happened. Something happened. There is a part of adaptation to the democratic culture. But on the other hand, there is a subversion of this democratic culture. And we can consider that there is a real new populist speech in French Front National and in French nationalism. But the logic is still a nationalist one. And so there is no a real break with extreme right logic. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you, Sylvain. Probably you have a lot of questions, so please do not hesitate to ask questions. Due to some technical thing, you have to take a mic. There are two mics to ask some questions so that we can record your questions.
And please don't hesitate to speak slowly. James.
Good morning. Yes, Sylvain, I do have a question for you, and that is, you only had a certain amount of time, so you couldn't go into much detail regarding the anti-immigrant stance of the Front National in the days of Jean-Marie Le Pen, but there was clearly, I would say, some sort of ethno-national, not to say racializing bias that was also very much in the discourse, and so could you take us a little bit more slowly through the transition from that to what becomes mostly a targeting of Islam? No longer Arabs, Arab immigrants, but Islam. There's a change in thematics there, which I think maybe deserves, I'm sure you know about more than any of us, so I'd like to hear more about how you see that.
Okay. Shall we take more questions, or just I answer? Okay.
Answer.
Okay. Okay, the transition occurred during the 90s. During the 80s, the opposition of the Arabs migrants was based on some economical reasons, you know, because the Arabs were supposed to steal the job in France. But there were a change at the beginning of the 80s, and the reason, according to me, is the end of the communism in the world, the end of the communist world. And on that time, the extreme right is not anymore forced to choose between the West and the East. And I could say that the Front National lost its best enemy. And then he has to define a new political identity. And he's going to be inspired by what we call the French New Right. For example, the GREECE, Groupe d'études et de recherche pour la civilisation européenne. The GREECE is a group of intellectuals, nationalists, created at the end of the 60s, and that tried to rebuild extreme right ideology with the help of social sciences. And they reconsidered, for example, the identity concept with some anthropological concepts. So they didn't talk anymore about the biological notion of race, but they only talk about culture. And they
Which may be the new figure of race, right?
yes, of course, it's a new logic. And they stopped to talk about superiority, but to the necessity to preserve differences, which is ethno-differentialism. So they were, so when, and also during the 70s, they look for a third way between capitalism and communism, and criticize the materialism of the capitalism, pretending it was a danger for the soul of the culture, the soul of the nations, of the identity. So it was a bit a marginal group. Also, they had some connections with some extreme right groups and even some right groups. But during the 80s, when Front National lost its best enemy, they found into the new right theory a way to rebuild their ideology, its ideology. And at the time, the Front National, for example, how could I explain? It is very interesting to see that, for example, during the first Gulf War, when there was a coalition built to liberate the Kuwait, Jean-Marie Le Pen condemned this coalition and condemned the United States and the England and France to go to liberate the Kuwait. And in his speeches at the time, there were many sources of ethno-differentialism. And the main enemy became the United States and not the USSR, the Russia. So during the 90s, there were in Front National an ideology that was pretending to preserve the identity, but also to preserve any identities. And according to Front National and extreme right, some cultures couldn't be mixed. So this was during the 90s, but what Marine Le Pen realized in 2002, when his father ran for the election and reached the second round of the presidential, was that her father would never become president because many of the electors, and even maybe of Front National electors, considered that he was a danger for the democracy. For example, some investigations of the Cevipof at the time established that between 40 and 60% of Jean-Marie Le Pen's electors considered that he was a danger for democracy, although they were voting for him. So she realized that she had to, and she told it to me in an interview, she had to integrate the Republican and democratic culture to be able once be elected. And that's why she found into the speeches and the conceptions of some people like Wilders a bit later, a real inspiration that to pretend to defend secularism, pretend to defend feminism only against the Muslims. And she realized in a strategic way it was much more efficient in an electoral way. So it is quite a long time. It was between, I would say, the change occurred between the 90s and 2010, during maybe 20 years.
Just curious to know whether we are witnessing a shift, a major shift, probably in the politics of those parties like Front National towards the homosexuals. Because not mentioning the leader in the Netherlands, who is himself homosexual, but some of the closest collaborators, at least one of them, of Marine Le Pen is also a homosexual. How do they adopt this new situation? Can we witness a major shift in that way? Thank you.
It is an aspect I discovered in an investigation I made in Front National between 2010 and 2011. I was really surprised. I met many militants and some leaders that told me they were gay. I was really surprised because it was the first time I noticed this in the Front National. It was totally impossible during the 90s that a militant say to you that he was gay, or even some lesbians. And it was really a surprise for me. And I have to say that it's really curious because sometimes it's not easy for them inside the party. They have to face some homophobic words and sometimes also some homophobic discrimination. So they are in a, I would say, very complicated position. But they all, for example, when I question them about this strange position, that being homosexual into Front National, they all mention Marine Le Pen's speeches when she condemned the homophobic aggressions supposed to come from Muslims. So they consider that for them it is a kind of recognition of their discriminated people. Do you see what I mean? And it's a way for them to be integrated. See, I am in a Front National, and I am accepted in this party. So, in a way, it's a way to be integrated to the nation, in politics, and so on. So, although it is not easy for them, many of them told me that they have to face really homophobic insults and discrimination. But I think really for them it's a way of recognition. And I would say they are, except being homosexual, they are xenophobic like the others. You know, it's not because they are discriminated people that they are not going to try to discriminate some other category of people. So when Marine Le Pen, I would say some of them told me, I always had the ideas of National Front, Front National, but I couldn't vote or reach this party because I knew Jean-Marie Le Pen was homophobic. But when Marine Le Pen was elected president of the Front National, and when she started to condemn the supposed homophobic attitude of the Muslim, for me it was a recognition, and then I could reach or vote for this party.
So I have a question. I'm Claes de Vrees from the University of Amsterdam. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the notion of European integration and the role of the EU and Euroscepticism and how that has developed over the years within the Front National, especially because we have seen other parties across Europe who were not necessarily Eurosceptic to start with, but have developed in that direction, especially as issues of immigration, integration, and European integration have become aligned. So I'd be curious to hear more about your analysis of the Front National over time on the topic of Europe. Thank you.
That's a very important point. According to the electors, leaving the European institutions or even leaving the euro, the money, is not something really important. And even for some Front National leaders, it's not the most important thing. But so I think it's like, for me, it's like a bit secularism. When you want to close the frontiers, when you are in a nationalist party, in an electoral strategy, it's more efficient to say that you're not nationalist but sovereignist. You see what I mean? And for example, Marine Le Pen has the pretension to reconfigure, to rebuild the democracy in France. So for her, the opposition mustn't occur now between the left and the right, between social policy and economical liberalism. But she wants to rebuild democracy based on the identity. So there is, in a way, for her, patriotic, nationalist, sovereignist bloc, and cosmopolitanism, Europeanism, and bloc for globalizations. And the democracy, according to her, is rebuilding on these oppositions. So it's a way for her to try to reach from some electors that would naturally don't vote for Front National, I guess. So I think this opposition to European institutions has to be seen in its nationalist ideology. And that's why I don't think it's an opposition for real political reason or because the nation, France, would lost a part of her democracy. But it's really because of the preservation of an identity.
Last question. Yeah.
I had a question about the right to abortion, because being a woman, we thought that Marine Le Pen would have a very more friendly speech, but it's not that clear, so I was wondering what you were thinking about that.
Oh, that's an interesting question, because it's a real problem in the party, the question of the abortion. There is no official debate about it, but there is no official debate at all in Front National, because there is no internal democracy at all. But there are, I would say, some problems. Of course, at the end of the 70s, Jean-Marie Le Pen made an alliance with, I would say, a very, how do you say, integrist Catholicism, okay? So Bernard Antony was a Catholic leader, came into Front National, and he came with many militants, very well organized, and it was a real help for the Front National at this time. So Bernard Antony reached with him a strong conservative ideology. Jean-Marie Le Pen is not a real conservative. He doesn't care about abortion, about, it's not his problem. But because of this alliance, he was obligated, to say he was against abortion. And so that was the line of the political party for decades. So Marine Le Pen, she doesn't care really, like her father, about abortion. It's not a problem for her. It's not a. But inside the party, she knows there are many people that fight abortion, that disagree with abortion. So she has to find, I would say, middle term, middle way position. So that's why she say that there were some avortement de confort, the expression convenience, abortions shouldn't be paid by Social Security, do you see? So it was a bit a compromise between the liberal wing of the party. Many young people. I've interviewed some young women who told me that they made abortion, and it's not a problem for them. But on the other hand, there are still many traditional Catholics into Front National, and Marine Le Pen have to consider them. So I think she built a compromise between the two sides inside the political party. Well, sorry again for my bad English, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Sylvain. We made a short break, and we will then follow with the Europeans.